So here we go. We're going to kick off for the next phase of today's OneAbility Education Day, and we're going to have a panel come up and join us next. So we're going to work through a series of facilitated questions with our panelists. So I'm going to introduce and invite them one by one to come up. So first up, Carolyn Murray has just joined us. And Carolyn and I have known each other for a really long time. I feel like this is a bit of a reunion day for me with all these fun faces. Carolyn has guided many young Canadian triathletes to countless major international events, including World Championships and Paralympics. She was responsible for leading 3 para-triathletes in the sport's Paralympic debut in the 2016 Paralympic Games, which were held in Rio. And Stefan Daniel, one of her athletes, won a silver medal in the men's standing classification at those games. Her intent, perseverance, and patience and communications has resulted in numerous awards and accolades, including the 2015 Triathlon Canada Elite Coach of the Year, the Sport BC Female Coach of the Year, Triathlon Canada Elite Coach of the Year in 2016 as well, and the Petro-Canada Coaching Excellence Award in 2016 and 2019. And Carolyn was an early joiner to the OneAbility family, and as we were kind of getting our first meetings underway, she was with us, and at that point just starting the triathlon program and very much kind of learning like what could she do to develop this incredible program in Canada. And here we are almost 6 years later, and you've just had such tremendous success. So welcome to today. I'm looking forward to the conversation with you. Next up, I'm going to ask Bruce Pinnell to join us. Dr. Bruce Pinnell he works in performance, health, and wellness fields as a practitioner in Victoria since 2001. Dr. Pinnell is an inspiring, innovative, and leading practitioner and regularly consults and presents in the healthcare and performance fields relating to performance, injury rehabilitation, health and wellness, stress and adversity management, business leadership, and building resiliency. He's worked with a range of athletes and teams in world-class level at major international events. Dr. Pinnell has worked with the Canadian Paralympic athletes and teams in wheelchair rugby, sailing, rowing, swimming, and sledge hockey. And we've also known each other for a really long time, since we opened Pisces, I think, back in 2008 or so. So welcome, Bruce. It's great to have you here. Looking forward to the conversation. And I also want to introduce Richard Peter, who is just having a few connectivity issues. So I'm hoping Richard's on. If not, he'll join us shortly. So I'm going to maybe introduce him now, and if we can get him on screen, then we will do so. And otherwise, we'll start with some questions for our 2 panelists and have him join right after. So Richard Peter goes by the nickname Bear. He's a Canadian First Nations basketball player. He was born in Duncan on Cowichan Tribes territory and resides in Victoria. When Richard was 4 years old, he was injured in a bus accident, leaving him in his wheelchair ever since. He began playing wheelchair basketball at the age of 15 when he was inspired by a team that came to his school and introduced him to the wheelchair sports. Since then, Richard has competed in 5 Paralympic Games, winning gold medal in wheelchair basketball for 3 of those. And last September, I had the great pleasure of seeing Richard play para-badminton at the Lima Para-Pan American Games down in Peru. And so he's a multi-talented athlete, and most of the posts I see are him out and about doing a variety of different sports. So definitely a multi-sport athlete, but yeah, great to have you join us, Bear, and super stoked for this panel today. So everyone raring to go? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we have a variety of panel questions that we're going to work through, but we also invite questions from the audience. So if you want to put a question in the chat box, then we will weave it in as we go through this session today. So the first question I'm going to kick off with, and Carolyn, maybe we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you got into parasport. You were an elite triathlete yourself. Tell us about your journey to get here.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, everyone, for having me. I can't believe it's been 6 years since I started the role of para head coach. So as Andrea mentioned, I was a national team athlete myself, competed in Beijing, and then went on quickly to coach at a development level. and had no para experience whatsoever. Was asked if I was interested in the role, and it just came at the right time. And I said, sure, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm going to need a lot of help, and jumped in with 2 feet and haven't looked back since. And I think it was really, really cool listening to Marco. A lot of his comments resonated with me. It was asking questions, being open-minded, and that's where I've gotten to. And you know, going to Rio, of course, was a highlight. That was the first time paratriathlon was in the games, so it was really special to be part of that. And then now continuing on, looking towards Tokyo.
Awesome. Thank you for that great introduction. Bruce, over to you. Tell us a little bit about your entry point into particularly the parasport world.
Okay, thanks. And it is great to, I'll start with seeing all the different names. I scrolled through the pages here, and so many familiar names and people I've crossed paths with over the years. And it's great to see people there. My entry point actually came through rowing with the adapted rowing program at Rowing Canada. I started working with the Rowing Canada national team in preparation for 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and with that involved being working with the adapted rowing program, and it was fantastic, and really enjoyed the experience with them. And part of it is, and a lot of people don't necessarily know this, I can't bend my left arm. I actually have a permanent disability in my left arm, but most people don't know that about me. And when I got involved with that team and I was doing something, and I made a comment, oh, I can't actually grab that and move that for you right now. And I explained why. They started making fun of me for being for having a disability. The parasport athletes are mocking me, and I thought, okay, we're good now. We can go with this. And it was just it suddenly became a community. And so with that, I got involved with it, and then it just led to lots of other experiences, and was introduced to the wheelchair rugby family, which is an incredible family in Canada as well. And that happened just after the Beijing Olympics, and from there just started working with a number of the adaptive sports or parasports throughout the years, and love it, absolutely love it.
Awesome. Yeah, you quickly get adopted into the parasport family, I find. Everyone's just so welcoming. Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about your injury and then how you ended up in parasport, and then a trajectory to Paralympics, multiple Paralympics.
Thanks, Andrea. Yep. Hopefully the internet and everything works well for me here at home. But yes, I guess first I'll talk a bit more about how I got injured and how I got involved into sport. I was actually hurt as a young child. So I was going to school. One benefit that my mom was the teacher at the school, at the preschool. So that was a benefit that I got in a bit early, I guess. So one day, got dropped off from school just in front of home. But being a young kid, I was only 5 years old, just turned 5 actually. And, you know, being a kid, I didn't want to go home quite at the moment. I still wanted to go play and have fun with my friends. The only problem was that all my friends were still on the school bus that I just got dropped off from. So without thinking of my own personal safety, I tried to run and catch up to the bus. You know, being a young kid, I'm sure any parents that are out there, you know, I've had some of those scares that your kid, sometimes you don't know what your kid's going to do. And so I chased and ran up to the bus, and obviously I was a very good athlete. I caught up to the bus. But the bus driver didn't see me running behind him. And I actually got very lucky that day, and that he backed up to drop off one of my friends just down the road. And he actually backed up, didn't see me behind him, and ran right over my chest. And I got very lucky that day that actually I fell into a puddle. And so that's the only reason and the only way I survived. And also with the quick thinking of my good friend that just got dropped off from the bus. Also, he actually saw this happen and came out and pulled me out from under the bus. And again, the bus driver didn't notice anything that happened. And so he drove on and finished the rest of his route. And my father, who was at home waiting for me, saw this all happen and quickly grabbed me, and we went up to the hospital, and I guess that started my SCI journey. So I think, very similar to Marco, that growing up with a disability, I think that really does make you see a lot of the different challenges, a lot of the different, I guess you learn a lot more different tricks, with Marco talking about with how his first job there, and just working with the person that he was working to had to reach up and grab his own piece of equipment that was up on top shelf. I mean, we still do that today, going shopping or doing whatever. If we need a little bit of assistance, then we just work, have to work our best charms and try to get out there and get some assistance there. And so you learn a lot of those different skills through a lot of different challenges that we have, from going to school and everyday life. I think that was probably one of my benefits too, that I grew up on the island. I grew up in Duncan, Cowichan Tribes. And so the majority of the buildings and schools that I went to were never wheelchair accessible, because this was back in the late 70s, early 80s. And so accessibility was a different story back then as it is today. So it was definitely a few challenges. I think every school that I went to, mainly the first couple of weeks or first month, every school had to be adapted to be made accessible for me to attend classes. And so that was always a bit of the challenge there too. And so I think the teachers and everybody else sort of got to know that, well, I might be a little bit late getting to class, whether it's taking the lift up to the second floor or, just making sure everything is accessible. So there's always a bit of a challenge there. But that was one big thing that I think I grew up with, that I said, no, I don't want anybody to see, my wheelchair, which is one thing that everybody has noticed first. And so I would always sort of put myself forward and say, well, hold on, I'm Richard. Yes. Very similar to the talk earlier that, a lot of people will say, no, sorry, you can't do this. And I'm like, hold on, I've always got that little chip on my shoulder, as I always mention, that, nope, yes, I can do this. And here, I'm going to show it to you. And very similar to Marco, that, I had a lot of teachers and great family and great friends that I always tried to make everything adaptable. And so that was always very great for me. So I was always included with a lot of different sports and a lot of different programs and things that we did with the family and the community. So I never really thought much about parasport. Of course, I did hear about this young guy that was wheeling around the world, and occasionally I'd be wheeling around, Duncan, or going to school or just going into town, and somebody'd be like, oh, hey, Rick, how's the wheel going? And I'm like, hold on, I don't know that person. And then they were, of course, referring to Rick Hansen, who's wheeling around and just making a small joke that you learn to laugh about and so on. So it was pretty funny. And so that's how I learned about what Rick was doing. But I'd still never really heard about parasport. I actually got my first involvement in parasport was with a Victoria Wheelchair Sports Club. They'd actually heard about this young kid that was up in Duncan. And so they came up and did a basketball demo at my school. And actually at that time, I was like, no, I don't want to go. That's nothing for me. But, very luckily, I finally was persuaded to go give it a try. And so I said, sure, I'll go give it a try. And then I really enjoyed it. I just loved wheelchair basketball. I'd actually never really played much basketball, but I just enjoyed having a sport that I could really excel at. I think the benefits that I'd played sports with my family and friends, and they were all running and jumping. So that actually pushed me hard to try to keep up with them. And so that made it sort of an easy transition when I got into parasport. And so that's where I really enjoyed it. I mean, even to this day, as you mentioned, with trying a new sport, let's say like badminton, that I just enjoy all kinds of sports. That's one thing I would always say, that I'm never really just a basketball player. I just enjoy all kinds of sports and also introducing sports, like Marco mentioned, I'll be there to help try to introduce basketball, but any sport, whether it be tennis, athletics, badminton, there's, hand cycling is a big thing that I do now too. And so there's a lot of different opportunities that are out there, and just nowadays technology is making everything accessible. So that's definitely a few different benefits there. And so that's how I got introduced into basketball, was this demo team came to my school. And then I guess you could say the rest is history. And then I've continued on and played basketball. Once I decided to make that next step, that I was enjoying it, just playing it for fun and enjoyed traveling. And then I had a chance to say, all right, well, if I want to make it to the next level, that I would eventually have to move to Vancouver, because that's where the majority of activities were based in the SCI community. Was Vancouver had a lot of the different programs and opportunities there. And so that was definitely a big challenge. And hats off to let's say wheelchair sports and Victoria Wheelchair Sports and wheelchair basketball. They've always been there to help out. Like as coming from a low income family, it was definitely hard to find wheelchair and equipment. And so that was definitely a big challenge too. And so they had a loan program that would loan out wheelchairs. And so that made it much easier for me to, whether I got my first basketball chair and then athletics chair too. I did athletics, was my, I guess, sort of my first sport. And then I gravitated towards team sports, and basketball was the best one for me at that time. And so I've enjoyed, I just enjoy all kinds of sports, and I'm sure we can answer many things more later.
Awesome. Thank you. Carolyn, I'm going to come back to you. Tell us about some of your key learnings around parasport as you've sort of gone through this journey.
Okay, there's lots, and they're still ongoing, for sure. So I think probably the biggest learning is that it's okay to ask for help when it comes to equipment and extra resources. Like, that's probably one of the differences, is that you do need more help when you're working with parasport, whether it is with equipment or just getting assistance. So that's not my nature to ask for help. So I think learning to do that was something that I figured out pretty early on, that I did need a team. And I think the other piece, it wasn't necessarily learning, but just something to share, that there isn't a huge difference. They're all athletes, and we're adapting things, but on the able-bodied side, you're also adapting things for each individual. So on that side of things, it's really not that big of a difference. Probably the biggest difference is, I think, the community is really, really strong and stronger on the parasport side. And I was surprised at how open to sharing across countries, across organizations. And I know we'll talk about OneAbility a little bit later, but everyone's just open to sharing. And I think it confirmed my hope and thought that, kindness and success can actually coexist. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And that has been showcased absolutely. So those are probably the first couple, and I'm still learning. So you can ask me again in 6 years and I'll have another 6 more things to share.
That's awesome. How about you, Bruce? Tell us a little bit about your learnings about parasport over time.
Thanks, Andrea. So I think one thing that's really probably the most important thing I've learned, and I don't say I learned this, it reinforced what I believed to be true when I got in, is that it's still performance. It's still a performance environment. And whether it's at a youth level or like a recreational youth participant level, or whether it's at the elite levels at the Paralympics, performance is still the focus. The people involved want to perform. The athletes, they're athletes first. And all it does is create, maybe there's different conditions or different things, and then creativity starts taking over. How do you do this then? How do you deal with managing from a physiology perspective, or a strength conditioning perspective, or a team play perspective, or adapting the apparatus or things? Creativity starts dominating things, which is just as fascinating discoveries and discussions around that. So I think the key thing is performance. It is a performance environment, and that is a very important attribute, and that's why they compete. That's why they get involved. They like to just be involved. It's the best part. I also noticed one of the things that was really fascinating was my first trip to the Paralympics and going into the village was how fascinating it was of the feel of inclusivity. And it's actually a different feel from the village at the Olympics. Again, performance is still the dominant theme, but the inclusivity and the acceptance and the curiosity that exists in the village, it was fantastic. And to see all these people all these athletes who have a shared focus on being elite and world class, also being very curious about each other, about other sports, about other adaptations, how people are doing things, and to be in those discussions and see the celebration that can go on. So performance was a key focus, but the inclusivity and also the recognition and celebration of other people's successes, like other athletes when they succeeded, even against you or in other sports, just recognizing excellence where excellence was. It's just, when you see excellence, it's excellent. It doesn't matter if it's your country or not. It's just that there's a much better feel in the Paralympic Village around that. Also, something that I learned pretty quickly is be willing to jump in and help, but don't help unless it's really asked. And so with the athletes, when they arrive at a camp, for example, they've done everything to get there, whether they're wheelchair athletes or other athletes. They've done everything to get there, and now they're in the camp, and then maybe there's stuff happening or a training environment. Be available, even if it's not my job. I think Carolyn on the list too, and Beryl on the list. People do a lot of stuff that are outside their prescribed roles in the Paralympic environment or in the parasport environment, and that's perfect. That's what makes it fun. That's what makes it a family. And so learning, being ready to do anything as needed, and but also asking before you do something. Don't assume someone needs help or assistance, and also if they do, they will ask. But being available is very important. And that's been, I guess, some of the key learnings. And as Carolyn mentioned, there's still a lot of learning. I mean, I'm constantly blown away by how did you do that? How can you do that so well? It's just incredible how effective and competent and skilled something is. I'm just fascinated. I learn more every day that I'm in that environment, which is really rewarding.
Awesome, thank you. And over to you, Richard. I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. You have transitioned between sports in the Paralympic world and parasport world. What is some of your journey felt like in terms of learning about those sports? And I'm gonna kind of fine tune it a little bit. What is sort of that piece that gives you the confidence to transition between sports and to try new things? Like, what are a couple pieces that you could share that might support others to either try something different or to support an athlete to do something different?
Whenever I talk to either new athletes or even just new SCI members, one of the biggest things is, especially after incurring your injury, it's, I always say that's just a little speed bump. And now you had your first journey, and now you're onto your second part of your journey of your life, and it's always a challenge, but it also depends on the way you view it. For sports, that's one thing that's been good and bad at times, and that I just love all sports. And that's one of the biggest things. I said, all right, well, if you do love, whatever your passion is, whether it be with work or school or education or, any activity, I said, all right, well, that's what you enjoy doing, then get out there and enjoy it and keep, do your best to enjoy it as much as possible. That's what I always said too. Once I would finally retire, I was like, well, once it became more of once I didn't fully love it as much as I used to when I was younger, I was like, all right, now maybe it's time to retire. And mainly my body said, all right, it's time to retire. And so it was, my body was telling me to slow down, but I did it as much as possible. And that's sometimes tough now too, even with badminton. I'm like, all right, I can help out as much as my body will allow me. Just with a few injuries that I've incurred through many years of the Paralympic level and training, and so my body is a little bit worn down, and so that's one of the tough things too, that to try to push my body a little bit more to keep going, but like I've always told a lot of different coaches, and just said, all right, well, hey, as a few of the other panelists mentioned too, that with the parasport athletes, it's always the challenge that everybody living with an SCI, that everybody, you see those challenges every day, and everybody has different solutions to it. And I think it's, I always say it's the different pair of glasses that you put on once you do encounter an SCI, that you'll see things differently. With how Marco was talking earlier with work, I mean, one of the big challenges to it is that realistically you should put any employer and let them live a day or a couple days or a week with a disability. Put them in a wheelchair, blindfold them for a day, and say, all right, now let's see how accessible your workspace is, and see how accessible the washroom is, accessible how the front door is, whether there's always a flight of stairs, and that the wheelchair entrance is always around back or around the side, or I've gone into restaurants where I've had to enter through the kitchen. And so that's always a bit of a challenge there too. And so there's many different sort of road bumps that are always out there. And so with sports, I always say, well, sometimes people will say, all right, well, this is the sport I love. All right, this is how it can be adapted, and this is how you can enjoy it. But there have been also other times where I'll say, all right, well, I know that's the sport you love, but maybe you should try this avenue. And that you can hopefully succeed as much as possible around this route. Because I'm sure there's been, let's say, some athletes who, let's say, are quadriplegic and they're like, oh, I love basketball, but wheelchair rugby might be the better option, or athletics or swimming, and say, well, here, let's try this, and there might be a bit more success there. And so that's definitely one of the, I guess, like I said, one of the smaller road bumps that some people will see, and I'll say, right here, let's try to direct you around that. It's never a roadblock. I always say it's just a little speed bump that it might be a bit of a hindrance, but you still can manage your way around it, and hopefully get the right path to success.
Tell me, I'm going to stay on you for a minute. Richard, so your journey around keeping yourself mentally healthy as you've navigated your sport journey. And so maybe just give us a few pointers around sort of how you've navigated your own mental health.
Let's say, that's which direction shall we go here now? Let's say when I first started. So when I first got into sports, it was great. I'd say wheelchair sports opened so many doors for me. Me living in, on reserve back on the island, in a small town, I was the only kid with a disability there. Or sorry, Marco, should I say handicap? But I was the only kid back then in a chair. And so it was definitely a challenge to be included and succeed. And so pair sport really opened so many doors for me. And I was like, wow, this is great. Get to travel around, meet new people, meet new cities. But financially, it was a big challenge for me and my family. And so we did a lot of fundraising, had a lot of assistance from Cowden tribes, from my family back home, and even the city too. They always helped out whenever they could too, and make it so that I can attend some of these different events and sports. And so once I got started, then the first sort of small barrier too was, racism, and that being the only First Nations kid also coming out. And that was a bit of a challenge at times where I'd get involved and they're like, oh, who's this new guy? But because I was, I guess, athletically gifted, so I did, I guess, rose to success pretty quickly and adapted to each sport. I'm like, oh, I like this. And I adapted to just about any sport that we tried. And so there was a bit of a pushback at times from whether it be other athletes or, other people. And so there was a bit of a challenge. And I do recall that, when I first got involved in basketball too, got a bit of racism there and a few, backlashes there. And actually I went back home and I was like, all right, luckily I was able to talk to one of my family members, my grandfather. And I sort of talked to him and said, he sort of noticed that something was wrong. I'd always go see him all the time, good and bad. And I think he noticed that I was down one day. He's like, oh, what's the matter? And he's like, well, just went to a tournament basketball trip and got a lot of trouble. And I think I'm going to quit. I don't really want to play anymore. And so he had a really good chat with me, and his view was great. And, that's sort of the way I view things now too. And that he sort of mentioned, said, all right, well, yeah, what happened? I said, oh yeah, I got a bit of racism, and that does happen. Being a minority, there's always a lot of challenges here and there. And so he's like, all right, well, you can quit. That's all right. That's okay. If that's your choice, that's your choice. But he said to me, do you like playing sports? I'm like, yeah, it's great. I love playing sports. And then he put it point blank and said, well, are you going to allow him to take that away from me? And so that's one thing that I stuck with then. I was like, all right, that's true. I love playing sports, and I'm not going to let anybody else take that away from me. And so that was one of the biggest things that, like I said, really stuck with me. And that's what I try to promote out too. It was like, if you guys really do enjoy what you want to do, then don't let anything stop you, and just keep on doing it. And if you've got a love of sport, love of work, love of family, just make it happen. Where there's a will, there's a way. So that was one of the first challenges there.
Yeah.
And so I've always had a bit of that challenge. There's always been something in the back of my mind. I mean, there's always a few, like I say, roadblocks here and there. I think coming from a small town, moving into the big city and getting into sport, that was a big challenge for me also. And so at first, me and my family were a couple cousins and friends were going to move to Vancouver. I said, all right, I want to go try to reach that next level for wheelchair basketball. So I said I had to move to Vancouver. In the end, my family everybody backed out, and I moved to Vancouver by myself. So that was actually a big challenge for me too. And that I was like, all right, this is the first time moving to the big city, and it was a bit of a challenge. But luckily, I still said, all right, well, this is the choice, the path that I'm on now, and I want to succeed with sport, and so this is what I had to do to go to that next level. So I think living with an SCR or as an athlete too, going to different towns, different communities, there's always a lot of those challenges, and so I've been very thankful with all the support from my family, my community back home that said, all right, well, Richard, this is the path that you're on, continue with it. And so I've always had a lot of support to get me to where I am today, and that's what I'm always very thankful. And so once I got into sport, then yeah, same thing with support from wheelchair sports, wheelchair basketball. They've always helped me succeed, and so that's always been made things a bit smoother.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, and appreciate your vulnerability around sharing experiences with racism as well as disability. That's an interesting intersection to navigate. I just want to, you keep saying SCI, so just so that everyone in the audience knows that's spinal cord injury. So as we reference that going forward, just so everyone's aware of our acronym world. So I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn and ask you about how you support the mental health of your athletes and what that kind of looks like for your team.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'm really fortunate. I have an amazing support team that works with me. So I do have a mental performance consultant that works alongside the program. So she's a huge part of that. And specifically during this time, we definitely are making it a priority, even more so because this past year has been quite a challenge with the disappointment of a postponement of games and a lot of time alone. And training is obviously completely changing all the time, and there's so much uncertainty. So we've really tried to keep our communication open and often, and not making any assumptions. I think the athletes I work with are very resilient, which is fantastic, but being sure that they're not just putting on a brave face and actually struggling. So I think the first part of that was establishing trust, which we do have within the group. Fortunately, it's taken, it takes a bit of time, and you don't assume that you have that, but the athletes I work with have a really strong sense of trust. So we can have an open dialogue, and I can ask some of those hard questions to just make sure that everything is going okay. And they also reach out to each other, which is really important, that they have each other to support. And so we've had group sessions every month with the athletes to just be together, and we have a topic, but the main thing is to help them realize that there's other people in the same position, and it's okay to feel, especially this year, some disappointment, and sometimes it's hard to voice that because it is sport and there's bigger things happening right now. So for them to be in a safe place that they can communicate any challenges they're going through has been a big piece of it. And I think the other piece this year is looking back at the why. So I know Marco referenced that in his presentation, and that's been a big key piece for mental health on our side of why do you do this? And it has come back for all the athletes because they love the sport. It's not just because they're wanting to win medals or they're going to get attention, and having to have a deeper dive to figure that out actually has been really valuable. And I do believe that's helped their mental health. But the big thing is that they support each other, and they are a team. And then of course their extended community with their family and friends are always there. But yeah, I think not making any assumptions has been really important, because of not just saying, yeah, I'm okay, and then carrying on. We're always checking in on each other.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Bruce, I'm going to go to you. I mean, this is part of kind of your role within teams and supporting athletes, looking at their mental health and mental performance. So I'm going to pivot to see what your answer is for this one.
Great, thanks, Andrea. Now, Carolyn was right on the money. There's a lot of things she talked about in there, and the person who works with her team does a great job as well in this, which is great. Key things are I guess trust is a huge one, and trust comes by having a safe environment, an environment where, and it's a term I've used a few times now when I chat about a family, and when you have a family environment or a sport that actually prioritizes the individual is the priority, not the performance is the priority. It allows us in using some of Carolyn's words, a deeper dive into the meaning behind it. And it's not easy. It's not an easy environment in high performance, because I find athletes can sometimes very quickly, athletes and administrators and coaches and everyone can get really wrapped up into the performance side of it as being the most important aspect. But when people are struggling and don't feel comfortable or supported in that environment, their performance is going to suffer. So it's if you keep pushing the performance focus, you actually are going to lose your athletes anyways. And so having an environment that is that's open, it's an environment that's safe. It's an environment that it's okay if someone comes to me with certain things. There are some areas I can have the conversation with, but I'm also very clear that we need more help on this. This is something that I'm not qualified or able to handle on my own, and so it might involve reaching out to other members of the IST, the integrated support team around a sport, or into the community, into their, in terms of connecting up with family doctors, community resources, or other resources that they may have through family plans. Like if a younger athlete, mom or dad may have an extended health plan that covers additional resources, is knowing what's out there for them, but also not being afraid to have the conversation. Being okay to have a conversation, to normalize it, and that this is a pretty common experience for athletes who are striving and under pressure, and that's okay. Doesn't mean I have to answer it right away or have a solution, but the critical point is that they were open and felt safe enough to come and speak to myself, speak to me about it. I don't have to have all the answers, but I have to help them find the resources they need. And again, going back to my earlier point, if you value the individual more than you value the performance, then it's an environment that can work. Interesting, when I look back at there's a lot of stress in the world, a lot of things are going on outside of the sport, and sport for many people, able-bodied or people with disabilities, sport is a place that they want to go to. It's an area they choose to go to, they want to invest in, whether it's at the recreational level or the elite level, high performance. It is what they do by choice, right? There's a lot of things we do in our daily living that we have to do, whether it's go to school or go to our jobs. But when they go to their sport, that is a place that's based on passion and love for what they do, the enjoyment of it. And you start realizing if that's an area that is now being compromised, that's becoming the stressor, or that's starting to have implications that go beyond, then we need to slow things down and take a temperature check. And it's when you kind of take perspective on stuff, some people can get pretty overwhelmed by some, in the big picture, not necessarily some huge issues. like a delayed trip or a cancellation of something. You're choosing to be in the sport. You love being in the sport. You invested time into it. And also everyone else who's in your sport is probably dealing with similar setbacks or challenges as well. So let's normalize that, and let's take the temperature down, and let's find some resources. Let's kind of situate it in the bigger picture and keep sport a place that's fun. Keep sport a place that's safe, a place where they belong and can still excel, while still managing challenges outside.
Safety and belonging, two of my favorite words in the sports system. We're going to stay there, actually. So I'm going to stay on you, Bruce. In fact,
Okay.
you raised them. What do you think we need to do to support people showing up as they are so that they have safe experiences and they do feel like they belong? We are in a year like no other that has really shone a light on a number of social justice topics. And, we heard from Richard earlier that he's faced racism in his sport experience. We know there's continued discrimination on a whole variety of identifying factors across our sports system. So how do we create those safe spaces? How do we start?
Okay, that's a massive question. That's almost an entire other conference, isn't it? Uh, and I'm happy as well
Another
for
conference.
yeah, I'm happy for Bear and Carolyn to jump in here as well. But a lot of the stuff around creating safety and belonging. There's two areas that's going to happen. One, it's going to be driven by the participants themselves, like the association, the club, like the people actually competing or playing the sport. That's one element, but that's kind of micro of it. The macro is the structure behind it, the programming, and the accessibility to prioritize and recognize the value this offers in people's lives. And remember, if I go back to what I said a little bit earlier, this is a place when it comes to sport, recreation, activity, leisure pursuits, anything we're doing, those are a choice. And those are things we love to do. We want to invest our time. And so I think at an administrative level, one of the things I've served on some boards, some community sport boards, is coming back to a question when you're making decisions at a board level or at a level or overseas an organization, is always coming back to what is the mission statement? What are we here for? What are we here for? So if you're making decisions around planning, around funding, around scheduling, around equipment purchase, around whatever you're doing, is the decision being made in a way that actually benefits the membership, not a small group of the elite who are aspiring for the top? And because not everyone wants to be an Olympian or a Paralympian, not everyone wants to be that. They just want to be in sport. They want to be in activities. They want to be in recreation. They want to be active lifestyles. And so coming back to a question, maybe a big hot topic, like, is this serving our membership, our mission statement? Right? Is the mission statement of organization to produce Paralympians? If you're at a community sport level, I don't think it is. It's inclusivity, it's access, it's programming, it's resources for the community. So if you're making decisions, always come back to the big picture. Who are we serving? Like who actually represents our membership, and are our decisions we're making reflecting that need? And if I look at some other sports I work with, that's sometimes it gets lost because sport, high performance sport, and I'll use this term in a whatever way. High performance is a very sexy topic. Everyone loves high performance. Everyone loves it. They want to talk about that, but it actually represents, I don't know the numbers, but it represents a very, 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 very small fraction of our population. And people who get involved in sport and recreation aren't, as I mentioned, they're not all aspiring to be that level. They just want to be competent in something and enjoy being involved and participating and have somewhere to go that gives them an escape from their day, escape from what's outside the world. So if sport's not providing that because it's not programmed that way, then we need to step back and look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, high performance by design is meant to exclude people that can't perform at that level, right? So when we're looking at our systems, we've in many cases kind of forgotten about the masses that we're here to support around participation. So it becomes a bit of a challenge.
Actually, I'll touch on that a bit too, Andrea. And mainly sort of coming from sort of both ends of it. Not that I'm a coach now, but I'm always helping out new athletes and introducing sport. For me as a new athlete, I do recall that was one of the benefits of, I think Carolyn mentioned earlier, with working with your own peers. And for me, like I said, growing up as the only kid with a disability when I was younger, and then getting involved in a parasport, that was a great outlet for me that I'm like, all right, I can find other athletes and other people that have got similar disabilities and similar injuries. And so that was great for me because I was a teenager. I was learning loads of things, right then and there. And so I got so much information from all the guys in any of the sports on what to do, even just to travel. I'm like, oh, do I need to bring, whether it be a shower bench or a raised toilet seat or all my supplies with me? And then I'd see other athletes that travel with half as much. And they're like, oh no, you don't need all of that stuff. If you can manage to jump around, then you can make this happen. I think one of my first trips, the hotel room was not wheelchair accessible. It was, I guess, a normal hotel room, but then that's where you adapt and you make sure that, all right, well, this is still semi-accessible and this is how we adapt. And so I learned so much through all the different peers that I've met through sport. But then, just with Bruce, how he was just talking about with athletes, and yes, I was the same, that I just love sport and love to get out there. But I also noticed that with a few of the coaches that did realize, I guess, some of my potentials, because I do the same, that I'll try to introduce sport and make sure that everybody enjoys it and has fun. Because all right, if you're not your first day at some new sport that you're doing, then you're not going to pursue it. So that's where I always try to say, all right, let's try to make sure that everybody has fun and tries to get included and enjoy it as much as possible. Which I always just went out there and had a lot of fun. And then with a few coaches and a few teammates, it's, well, actually, Richard, you can do a bit more. Like for me, being on the national team, that was never on my scope. That was never one of my goals. I'm like, no, I'm just enjoying having fun. I'm just enjoying traveling. I'm just enjoying playing sports, just having a good time, which maybe I have too much fun in the sport and also outside of the sport. I'm sure that's one thing that I'm known for, is wherever I'm playing, whether it be recreational or sometimes even in the gold medal match, that I'm out there smiling and having a good time, either at my expense or my teammates' expense or the opponent's expense. And so that's always good and bad. Maybe that's one of my cues too, just how to deal with some of the pressures, is to make sure to have a good time. And that's the one thing that I always view, that, all right, if there's a lot of pressure, then I'll say, well, let's make this as easy as possible. So with a lot of coaches that I did push me to that next level, I think that was one of the big things too. Bruce sort of talked about that. It's hard to say, all right, yes, this is the high performance level, this is the recreational level, this is the competitive level. And then you've got to, as a coach, it's tough to sort of push some of those athletes to that next step, that next level. And there's always that one sort of fence that, all right, either they're going to push to the next level and get over that first hurdle, or whether they stop there and say, oh, this is where I'm going to stop. And that's the big thing. That's, maybe that's why I never got into coaching. I know that's always a bit of a challenge to push that next athlete to that next level. And because I do the same, I do see some good things in different athletes and say, all right, here, you can do a bit more. And so that's definitely, I know it's a bit of a challenge, but with a few of the different sport groups that are here online too, that there's always one of the different benefits. And I think that's also a benefit right now with technology, that any sport is now adaptable. And like, that's why I can't say that, oh, here, Marco, you're a great athlete, get involved in basketball, which there was a smaller amount of sports that were available back then, but now there's just about any activity can be adapted. And so that's why I always do say, well, all right, what do you love? Here, let's see how adaptable that is, and see if you can get back into it and get back to doing what you love.
Awesome. We are getting close to the end of our time, and we haven't had any questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask you about one each more questions, I think. We'll just see how our time is. But Carolyn referenced this earlier in the presentation around sort of that opportunity to work together. And so, we kind of kicked off with Carolyn talking about some of her journey into parasport and learnings along the way. So, we're in a pretty unusual year, hopefully unusual. Hopefully this isn't foreshadowing to what every year is going to be like going forward. But, how have you learned from others? What's the importance of connecting and collaborating? And we'll start with you, Carolyn, since you kind of got us on this topic early on.
Thanks, Andrea. So as you mentioned, back in the early days of OneAbility coming together, I received an email to see if I would be interested. And honestly, like as I said at the beginning, I had no experience working in parasport. I really didn't know what I was in for. And so I was welcome to any knowledge from anyone. And so for sure, that was such a great environment, because it was welcoming. And things that I maybe thought about or worried about were not really anything to worry about, because was maybe saying the wrong thing or making mistakes, that kind of thing. And so having an environment like that, where it was an open conversation about what each organization was doing, and just having a sense of community, gave me such peace of mind. And although maybe the trajectory I was trying to go with the athletes was different, a lot of these were community programs and getting involved. The challenges are the same. And, we're just trying to support athletes in their, whatever they're trying to do. And so it doesn't have to be a connection with high performance environment. I think for me, starting out in that way was really great. And I just felt supported and knew that if I had questions on some of these questions that I'm like, I should know the answer, but I don't know. I don't know a lot. I haven't worked and I haven't been in someone's shoes who has a visual impairment, which were most of the athletes I worked with at the beginning. So just to be able to ask the questions that I feel like I should already know was fantastic. And then from there, I reached out to other parasport coaches, and right away they were like arms open, excited to answer any questions and be involved. And I still have great relationships with them. And then now I'm more involved with coaches internationally. And it's all the same, because we don't have all the answers, and we can be definitely stronger together. And like I said before, I think that is unique on the parasport side, where there's much more openness to sharing. We're not hiding our information so that no one else can have an advantage. In my experience, it's been wide open from the community level up to the top international with our competitors. So I'm going to continue using those resources, because even in 20 years, if I'm still involved, I'm still not going to have all the answers. And why not use our community support to do that?
Awesome. How about you, Bruce?
I think I would agree entirely with Carolyn's answer as well. I think in my position, in my role, and my experiences, what I like about that is I recognize I don't have all the answers, but I do have the ability to be an advocate and to ask the questions and to be confident to do those questions and to help to work with others. Like if something I don't see, not to turn a blind eye, or I can't understand, not to go, oh, I don't know how to deal with that, is to say, okay, we can work on this. I don't know what we can do, so let's ask some questions and kind of push. And I think, as I believe Marco referenced the Field of Dreams. I think it was Marco, maybe it was Richard. I can't remember who. It was said earlier on at some point. It was, if you build it, they will come. And part of my thinking sometimes is, if you come, they will build it. If you come with a problem, come with a question, come with an inquiry that's justified, it's substantiated, it's needed, then you go to the right people and they can help build it. But having that network's important, and knowing who to go to. And again, coming in when I was younger, I didn't know who that network would be, and over time built that network. And it involves leaning on people, talking to people, like connecting with yourself and your others. Is I don't know the answer, but I know who might. And but we have a question, and so let's find somebody who can help build it for us.
Awesome. And Richard, how about you? You've told us a lot today about kind of your journey, and so a short piece on sort of how relying on your network has been important.
Well, a little opposite to the others that I'll say, yes, I have all the answers. But actually, no, it's the same as just what Bruce was talking about too, that, yeah, there's a lot of different people that are out there. Even I just noticed one of the questions from Jessica V. Sorry, I'm not going to challenge your last name, but she's an OT, and just, yeah, get out there. Social media is much easier nowadays, that you can do a search and find whether an athlete that's local, or a coach that's local, or also maybe that somebody's quite a distance away, but then with social media or the internet, that you can connect with them and find out what's going on. And even now that there are a few strength and conditioning coaches that are writing some books and some information that is online, so there's definitely a lot of different opportunities that are out there. For me, yeah, when I first got involved, it was, like I said, it always just opened a lot of different doors, that I could get out there and just enjoy what I wanted to try, and just finding out more about equipment and sport, and and then all different disabilities. I think I owe a lot of credit to Easter Seal camps. If anybody knows what those are, that when I was younger, before I got involved in the parasport, that I get involved in the Easter Seal camps, and I was like, all right, I want to go and again find more peers that are similar to me. And it was a bit of a challenge that everybody that was there, you know, there was a few people, but we all had many different disabilities, and so that was the big challenge for me. And so that was the fun thing, that I think that's where I learned how to include everybody. I said, all right, here, let's play hockey. And I said, this is how we're going to include everybody. And so that was one of the big things that I wanted to do. Maybe my love of sports said, here, let's do this and let's try to include everybody. And that was, you know, a big challenge. And I guess that helped me. I think growing up as a young child with a disability, that you do learn to see a lot of those challenges and learn a lot of those different solutions, and just to see things. And I think that's one of the big things that help you succeed in later in life. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed doing. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have run down our time clock today, as always happens. Such great discussion. The time goes really fast. So I want to really thank and applaud our 3 panelists for being here and for the incredible work you're doing in the parasport system, and for being a voice and an advocate and incredible athlete bear. And we're just really grateful that you could join us today to share your experiences. So let's do a virtual round of applause. Miss the applause days. So yeah, we're going to take a short break. I think Pisces is going to play one more video for us during our break, but we're going to come back at 11:10 to kick us off for our final segment of the day. So over to Pisces to play a video.
Anasa Asnisam. My name is Ayam Ganau Daniel Young Mercer. I am Nishka and Gitsan ancestry.
Hello everyone, Chiaka and Squeshed. My name is Tiffany Adams. I'm a member of the Lytton First Nation.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda DeFay and I'm a member of the Métis Nation of British Columbia.
Hey everybody, Mariah Robinson here from the Numgis First Nation.
Series 2 of Fit Nation home workouts are almost ready. Are you?
Fantastic. And part of the reason we wanted to share that video is that Richard Peter is going to be trained in Fit Nation in the next few weeks. And iSpark is joining us today. Many of their leaders, and Alec Nelson, as we spoke about earlier, works very closely.